Good morning, one and all. It's good to be together, and I hope you enjoyed the first day of spring yesterday. It's just fantastic, and it continues today. I always encourage you to grab a messenger on the way in. On the front is an order of worship, a lot of announcements inside, and information on the back about life groups that meet at various places across the city. You can call one of those numbers or speak to any of us about those life groups. Also, I remind you that we are actively looking to revamp this particular document, and that should be happening very, very soon, so you'll be hearing about that, but there will be something for you to pick up as you come in. If you're visiting with us, I encourage you to stop at the Welcome Center, get some information, some things we'd love to let you take home with you. And if you'd leave us some information, we would like that, but it's not necessary, but do stop by there and say hello. This is always a special time of year for me as I think about coming to Clarksville, and this month in particular marks 30 years since I first came to what was Madison Street Church of Christ many years ago, and it's good to have my family with me today as I'm thinking about that occasion. And as I was rolling it around, I thought, well, what would I preach about today? And so today and at least next week, I want to talk about Jesus when he turned 30. And so we'll be looking at that in a moment. And one thing we'll be looking at is as he started his ministry. He started at the age of 30 and he issued a call, and the call was to follow him. And so we're going to kick off by just singing about Jesus and reflecting on him and his ministry. I've been asked on this occasion to lead a song that's kicked off our vacation Bible schools for many years, and it's Jesus in the Morning. They even gave me the words to it, so I'll know how it goes. That's just great, isn't it? They asked me also, would you, what if you had a reading from James 4:7? I don't know if everybody knows what James 4 and verse 7 says, but we'd have Kayla Jolly with us today. I think she might know what James 4:7. It has something to do about resisting the devil. We'll all say that together. As a matter of fact, if you would, read the words that are bold and underlined as we read from the 4th chapter of James. And if a word is bold and underlined, read it. Let's stand and read together. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore, submit to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he'll draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. Let's sing together. It is always good to be together. And as I mentioned earlier, been sort of reflective this week. This past week marked 30 years here, and I got to thinking, well, should I show up today? Because 30 years ago, George Rollins, one of the elders, said, just don't show up on this Sunday. It was cooler than it was today. It was ice storm. About 70 people somehow managed to make it to the building, and I've asked the elders for that 1 week on, 1 week off schedule ever since, and they've never bought it. But at any rate, I'm glad to be here. And I did think 30, and it made me think of Jesus, because Jesus was 30 years old when he began his ministry. I want to take a look this week and next week, maybe one after that, I'm not sure, but at Jesus as he was getting started 30 years after his birth. And so this morning we're looking at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry at the age of 30. And the first thing that he did was to select a group of disciples. Literally the word means learners, but people who would be with him, who would watch him, who would live with him, who would listen to his teachings, and then they would go out and share that. And he picked them to share his message. He specifically began by calling 2 pairs of brothers. They were both fishermen, and that particular account is going to serve as our basic text for this morning. If you'd like to follow along, we're going to be in the 4th chapter of Matthew as today's text. While you're turning there, you might also mark 1 Corinthians. We're going to be there in a few moments. But let me begin by reading from Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 through 20, as we look at the call of Jesus, which is, follow me. And Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw 2 brothers, Simon, called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. They immediately left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in the boat with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets. And he called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father, and they followed him. Now, even though this account, this call, deals with four specific people, I think there's some insights that we can gain from it. And this morning, I want to share with you 5 things that I see from this text. And the first one is this: Jesus began his ministry by calling ordinary people to discipleship. You know, these men weren't particularly educated or wealthy. Their occupation wasn't at all that uncommon. It was rare at that time to have more than one meal of red meat during the week. This was the pre-Mickey D's era. It was also the pre-Captain D's era as well. But fish was a real staple in the diet. So these men had an occupation, and they're going to have regular income because people back then, they loved their fish. And fishermen could be found in abundance in that area. Now, the men that Jesus called, just say all that to say this, they were common, ordinary people. You may remember the words of Abraham Lincoln, whom we quoted last week. God must love the common people. He made so many of them. So that's just the way it is. It's true. And it's true for any group of people. In any group of people, you're going to have a lot of people who are average. Go figure that out, all you mathematical statisticians. It's the way it is. And it's the way that God designed things. Listen to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning in verse 26. For you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called, but God has chosen the foolish things of this world to put to shame the wise. God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things that are mighty. And the base things of the world, and the things which are despised, God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. Remember, when it comes to following Christ, it is not so much what we are, especially at the time that he calls us. It is what he can make of us. And where does he start? He starts by calling ordinary people to follow him. It's not, and understand this clearly, it's not that there's no place in the kingdom for wealthy people or for educated people or for people who are absolutely outstanding and are just brimming over with talent. There's a place for everyone. That's the point here. And the point is, Jesus wants all kinds of people in his kingdom. And so if you're thinking this morning, well, I'm just sort of ordinary, perfect. You're exactly the kind of person that Jesus is looking for. You're one of the kinds of people that Jesus is calling to follow him. But let me point out something else I see from this text, and it's this. Jesus called people who were going about their ordinary business. Peter, Andrew, James, John, they're out fishing. That's what they did every day. And they were, James and John in particular, were mending their nets. Very literally, I think in the Greek, the word is they were arranging. You drop your nets down in there in the sea and stuff, and you get on them, and you'd pull them up, and after a day of fishing, you'd go to the shore, or maybe sometimes even in the boat as they were doing, and you'd clean them off, and you'd spread them out, and get them all ready so they'd be in just the right position and to cast back into the sea whenever you were ready to go out fishing the next time. That's what they were doing. They're getting ready for the next time. They were going about their normal day's work. God has always called people who were doing this kind of thing. Think about these Bible stories. He calls Moses. Now, the call was extraordinary. There's this burning bush, but what was Moses doing at the time of the call? He's out tending sheep. Elisha is out doing some great prophetic kind of thing? No, he's just out plowing, and God calls him. Amos is a herdsman. He's a tree dresser. God sees him doing that. He calls him. Mary, well, she very possibly was still a teenager when she is called to give birth to the physical manifestation of God himself, God in the flesh, Emmanuel. And she bears a son. They call his name Jesus. And what's the common thread that runs through all these stories? And I could have told 100 more. It's easy to see. These people they're the common, ordinary people going about their common, ordinary business. Ordinary people doing ordinary things. Nothing special at all about them on the surface. But God saw something in them, and He saw something in their hearts. And today, we don't have to be what the world might call great in order to be called by Jesus. Not at all. We go about our business. The call is there, and He knows us, and He knows our hearts. So let's never forget that when it comes to the call of Jesus, and let's be open to answering that call. But again, back to our text. Let me bring this out. The call that Jesus offered was a personal one. I remind you, this wasn't the first time that these people had seen Jesus. If you look at the text and read the Gospels, Andrew had earlier heard Jesus teaching in a crowd. He was so impressed, he said, I got to bring my brother. He's got to hear this man. And he does. He's got a brother, by the way, by the name of Simon. And Jesus looks at Simon, and does he see a common, ordinary fisherman? You know, he sees something even deeper in Simon. He looks in his heart, and he gives him the nickname of Cephas. You're Peter, you're rock. That's the name I'm giving you. And on this rock, later he would say, that rock being the confession that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of God, I'm going to build my church on the confession that you make, Peter. But first of all, he gives him that nickname because he sees something in him. You're a stone, you're a rock. Jesus had even preached from Peter's boat before this episode. Everybody was crowded around, and Jesus said, Peter, let me use your boat. And they go out into the water. Jesus preaches from the boat, and there they are on the shores, almost like a natural amphitheater. And now he comes back to these men who've met him before, and he issues this call, follow me. He wanted the response to be a personal response to him, not just to some impersonal system of laws and rules and regulations. We need to remember that about Jesus and about His Word. We need to never forget that we need to be in the business of teaching Jesus to others. And that is every bit as important as the response to Jesus. You talk to someone about Jesus. You know what you need to do? You need to be baptized in the name of Jesus. You need to go into the water, come up out of the water. You need to confess that Jesus is Lord. And you need to, and let me tell you about the Lord's Supper. Let me tell you about the unleavened bread. Let me tell you about the communion. Let me tell you about singing. Oh, all those things are tremendously important. But they might not be the greatest starting points for people who are not part of God's family. I'll tell you a great starting point. It's Jesus, talking about Him, talking about your relationship with Jesus and how that has affected you, how that has changed your life, and that your faith is not in the church. Your faith is in Jesus Christ. Church is the body, but Jesus is the head. And I believe, I make no apology. I have such a high regard for the church of Jesus Christ. But my faith is in Jesus because the church is made up of people. You put your faith in a person, that can be disappointing sometimes. Jesus never. We are called to put our faith in a person, a personal system. Here's the call of Jesus, follow me. And look at the me who said that. Let's take a look at Jesus for just a moment. We find His first miracle being performed at a wedding feast. You know, He was the kind of person that people like to be around. They like to ask Him over for dinner, certainly as He started out before it became so politicized and the religious authorities got so involved. You know, the holy men of Jesus' day, they had a reputation for being a little bit apart and a little bit aloof and a little bit above it all and a bit superior. But man, Jesus, He came onto the scene and He was different. He was compassionate. And we find Him raising the 12-year-old daughter of Jairus and He brings her back from the dead, and the first thing He does after that is, y'all got any food around here? You know, she may be hungry. After His own resurrection, His apostles, they have forsaken Him and fled. Now He's resurrected, and He's going to appear before them again. What's He doing? He's out there on the shore, and He's making breakfast for them. I remind you that it was a breakfast of fish. That's a story for another lesson, but he wept at the tomb of Lazarus. He knows he's going to raise him from the dead, but he sits down and he weeps anyway because he's human, just like us. And he has that connection, and his heart is being poured out. He didn't try to fit anyone's mold. He had the quote-unquote wrong kind of friends, depending on who you ask, especially according to the religious hierarchy. He was around the wrong kind of people so many times. He was non-traditional. But at the same time, he was certain of who he was. He never lost sight of that. He was the Son of God. He was the Messiah, and he came to this earth for a purpose. And yes, he was revealing law, and yes, he was talking about a way of life. But most of all, our faith wasn't placed in the church. Our faith wasn't placed in the law. Our faith is placed in him. Follow me. And he doesn't make suggestions. He issues commands. He knows exactly who he is. He's Lord. And he's unequivocal about it. And he's unequivocal about following him and making a choice. And so many things in the Bible are this or that. They're one way or the other. There's no middle ground. Jesus says, I came to send fire on the earth. And how I wish it were already kindled. Oh, he never lost sight of his mission. Listen to his words in Matthew chapter 10. Do not think I've come to bring peace on earth. Oh, we love the little baby in the manger, don't we? Peace on earth, goodwill to men. That's what the angels said. He's 30 years old, and he says, hey, don't think I came to bring peace on earth. Well, he did, and he didn't. Depends on how his message is received. Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. Now, that's strong language, Jesus. What are you talking about? I came to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. That's your mission, Jesus? Not so much the mission, but the result of Jesus' clear, unequivocal message. And some will accept, and some will reject. And again, there's no real middle ground. And even sometimes families will be divided over what they think about Jesus Christ. He's clear. And he's devoted to his Father. On more than one occasion, we find him driving the money changers out of the temple. On one occasion, with a whip. You've turned my Father's house into a den of thieves. He knew that he was Lord. And he issues this call, and it is clear and it is unequivocal. You follow me. And that's still the case for us. We put our lives, our faith, our hope in Jesus. Let me point out one more thing about this call. Jesus called his disciples to a task. Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Now they got a job. He called these men to service. He called them to something to do, and it was for a lifetime. Come follow me, and I'll make something out of you. I have a way of life to offer you. I'm going to make you fishers of men. You've been fishing for fish, and now it's going to be for people. The focus of their fishing was going to change. They would still fish, as a matter of fact, on more than one occasion. They would still fish for fish. But the focus of their life now was not the fish in the sea. It was the people that they came in contact with. Reminded of the words of the Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 20, we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. Jesus was calling them to a work. And I understand we're not saved on the basis of our good works, but at the same time, Jesus calls us to works. He calls us to be workers. The call to follow Jesus, it is a call to work. It is a call to service. Not because our works pay God back, but because by our work, people can see God. People can be led to Jesus. They can see our good works and hopefully glorify our Father who is in heaven. Jesus says this, you follow me and be prepared to work. There's something to this. And that was the call that he made to Peter and Andrew and James and John. He called them to a task, and he called them to a mission. He called them to be disciples. And what came next? Well, it's this. They responded. They responded to the call to discipleship. They responded by following Jesus. Verse 20 says that Peter and Andrew immediately left their nets and they followed him. Verse 22, we read that James and John left the boat and their father, and they followed him. They put Jesus ahead of family. We read in Matthew 10, Jesus said, "He who loves me more than father or mother, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. He who loves son or daughter more than me, not worthy of me." These men left their families, and in a sense, they left their financial security. Again, they would fish again out on the rolling sea, and be in the sailboat and all of that kind of stuff, but that was never their main business. And there were times when the money came from the generosity of people around them, and they would go out with very little in faith, based on the words of Jesus. There's a cost to following Jesus. Jesus put it this way in Luke 14, "Whoever of you does not forsake all that he has, he cannot be my disciple." Pretty strong words. It's not that everything we have is gone, but it's forsaken. It's all devoted to the glory of God. It's never our primary business. Most of all, we are following Jesus. Most of all, we are trying to bring people to Jesus. Most of all, we are living for Jesus, and everything else that we have is to serve that purpose. Otherwise, it doesn't really fit. Jesus says, "Follow me." And he wants a complete commitment on our parts to his cause. And so I ask, how will you respond to that call? The call, "Follow me." I remind you, you don't have to be anyone special. You don't have to be doing anything extraordinary. But what you do need to understand is that Jesus calls you, he calls all of us to a personal faith in him. He calls us to a holy way of life. And he calls us to a task, to reach out to others and to try to bring them to him, to be a fisher of men, a fisher of women, a fisher of family, a fisher of friends, seeing everyone as someone who needs to be in a saved relationship with Jesus Christ, putting it all through that filter. Are you ready? You ready to follow him where he leads? This man's 30 years old. But he's speaking with the authority of God. Most of us have begun that walk. Most of us have followed him to the extent of sharing in his death and burial and resurrection through baptism. I know that's the case for most of us. You turn from your old life, you commit to a new life, but let's be reminded of the commitment that we did make. And let's live up to that commitment. And if you haven't done that, the call is always out there. Follow me. And I do begin that by putting my faith in him, showing that, expressing it publicly, confessing his name, putting him on in baptism, coming up out of that water to walk in a new way of life, to walk in his way of life. The call is there. Follow me. If you need to answer that call in a public way or to share anything for this church, we're going to sing this song together. I've decided to follow Jesus. If you need to share something with this body, come to the front. Let's all stand and sing together.